Printing money is bad,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's inflationary.
Mm-hmm.
But borrowing printed money is insane.
We have this study of money, hopefully in an interesting and entertaining way, so you can learn the ropes and um, if there comes a Cat 5 financial thing to your home someday, it's not going to really. So let's clear that up. So you're talking about a very disorganized fall. There's
Yes,
people out there right now, like the Deutsche Bank's Ted Dude. What's his name? He's a very respected guy.
crying.
Yeah, and man, he is like, he's talking things like central bank balance sheets, which you talked about,
Yeah,
their debt levels, our interest rates all-time low, this
yeah,
populist political sentiment around the world,
yeah.
and high asset prices, unexplainably high. So let's walk through those and and say, give us an idea of how this could cause a Cat 6 financial storm to a home near you.
Well,
Hmm.
yes. The idea that you can borrow money to buy assets which yield more than the cost of your money.
Okay, this is what they do.
That's it.
Okay, so a Goldman Trading Group or somebody, Goldman
Yeah.
Sachs, they can borrow $1 billion from whatever Wells
The money
Fargo,
markets,
the
yeah.
money markets or
Hmm.
whatever, and they can borrow it at 1%
Let's say,
or even less.
and buy an asset that performs or produces 2%.
What's wrong with
Then,
that?
then the question is, when do you stop?
Well, you don't.
Right. How much of that would you do? You just do as much as you can.
Uh-huh.
And so this has been the case in the bond market for these many years.
Explain.
So you buy yourself a $10,000 bond,
Yeah,
interest rates fall,
yeah,
the return is greater than the cost of your money. So if you buy a $10,000 bond that's yielding 3%,
yeah.
and now all of a sudden its rate is down to 2%, your bond is worth 30% more than everybody else's.
Good for me. I did a good thing.
Yeah, so your $10,000 just became $13,000.
Well, good for
And
me.
so then your rate of return is greater than the 1% or 2% that you have to pay for your money.
Right. So I sell that,
Maybe you do.
or maybe I
Or
just
maybe you
keep it.
hold it and wait, see if it's going to happen again.
Hmm.
And so this trade, if you will, so-called carry trade, where you borrow money and buy an asset that yields more than the cost of your transaction,
Hmm.
that's unnatural. That's not normal. It's not a typical circumstance.
It's not natural.
No, it's cheap money policy, and it's not a good thing.
Oh, so that's been the cry over these years about this. They call it ZIRP, zero interest rate policy, how it's detrimental to the financial world.
Correct,
So you're
because it
kind of messing with
encourages.
Mother Nature,
Yes, you are.
so to speak.
Yeah, and you in this case are the Federal Reserve, so they're messing with Mother Nature and have done so. In fact, the $4 trillion addition to the money supply by the Federal Reserve is, as Jamie Dimon pointed out, unprecedented.
4.5. Thank
Yeah, and then so now to expect that they can withdraw that money without causing unexpected events, well, it's naive.
What do you mean withdraw the money?
Well, they're talking about,
I could stay, right? There's going to be some kind of a meeting with Janet and
yeah,
the
they're having
boys,
that meeting today.
and that's
And allegedly they're going to announce their unwinding protocol.
they're 4.5 trillion,
Right.
right?
So we've gone over the maturing debt.
Mm-hmm.
So in the
Mm-hmm.
year coming, in the next 12 calendar months, they have about $300 billion worth of treasury debt that's going to come due. And what they've done for the last 10 years is every time they receive these payments from the treasury, they simply reinvest the money, buy more treasury bonds from the same treasury, in this case, the United States Treasury. The rest of their balance sheet of that, 4.5 trillion, 300 billion is due in the next 1 year. The rest of it is due and payable 10 years or more. So assuming that over the next year they cash in as these bonds mature, they take the principal money and they extinguish it, sterilize it. So they destroy the bond and they destroy the money.
They just flush it down the toilet.
Both. Yeah, the bond and the money that represents the bond.
Money to burn.
If they do that, they're shrinking the balance sheet and thereby shrinking the amount of money in circulation. But if at the other end of the spectrum, Pennsylvania Avenue and whatnot, if in Washington they're increasing the money supply at the same time by issuing new Treasury bonds, bills, and notes,
Infrastructure, military,
whatever,
right.
it negates the Fed's move.
And the Fed, when you talk about your Fed, you talk about Janet Yellen, the Federal Reserve Board.
And the Federal Reserve System.
The system.
Yeah, the Open Market Committee.
The whole system.
Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC.
Our favorite Open Market Committee.
Yes.
But there's, I read where they're just going to do, they're going to begin with about $10 billion a month. And if they got, that'd be 45 months to do 4.5 trillion. Is that right?
But they don't see the difference.
But they're not going to do that.
Well, because the difference between extinguishing a maturing security and the money that was used to pay it off, that's you can only do that to the extent that you have assets that are maturing, right?
I lost you. So
Okay, so
I get the idea where the Fed is paying interest out of that 76 cents you talked to us, right? They send it over to the Fed.
Well, you're talking about the Treasury now. I'm
Treasury.
talking about the Fed.
Yeah, but the Treasury to the Fed, right? So the Fed gets this money from Treasury to
the
pay
principal and the interest.
and the interest.
And in a sterilizing action, they would extinguish the bond, burn it, like burning the mortgage. But then they also burn the money that was used to pay it off.
For over the last 5 years?
No, they've not done that ever. They're
No,
saying
what I'm saying is, so let's just take a $1 million Treasury bond that the Treasury's been paying interest on for, say, 2 years.
And now it comes due.
And now it comes due. So they go ahead and give the Treasury.
The Fed hands the Treasury hands the Fed $1 million.
$1 million. Plus they've given them all that interest over the last year.
Correct.
And then you're saying the Fed does what?
Destroys the bond. Because now it's paid off.
Well, of course they've got to do that.
And then they destroy the money that was used to pay off the bond.
The interest and the million?
No, just the principal.
Oh, just the million.
Mm-hmm.
They keep the.
They keep the interest,
good
of
for
course.
them. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Oh, I see. So they so it's a sterilized operation.
Yes, very good.
Okay. All right, I like that. Okay.
So they withdraw that money from circulation.
Okay.
Theoretically adding strength to the dollar.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because these dollars are so strong, we're just going to thrush them down the toilet.
Right.
What do we care?
Now, I've read the report by the Office of Management and Budget, which shows that the federal government, and I've talked about this, the federal government needs $500 billion with a B, in the next 3 calendar months just to pay the bills.
And Mnuchin talks about that a lot.
Sure he does.
We're just going to pay for money we've already spent.
That's it.
I mean, he says that a lot.
Yeah. So if the Treasury is creating money and intends to create money, because that's what happens, remember? When the Treasury creates a Treasury bond, a bill, or a note, that thing immediately gets entered into circulation and is counted among the money supply. That's new money, fresh money. Didn't exist before.
Counted as a money supply.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? So if the federal government has to come up with $500 billion between now and the end of the year, where's it going to come from?
They're going to borrow more.
They're going to create more Treasury bonds and borrow more money from existing circulation. The problem with that is that these Treasury bonds instantly become collateral for additional borrowing, so the money supply expands. So $500 billion over 3 months, what is that? $175 billion a month or so? $160 billion a month. And so the government of the United States, the Treasury, is going to be entering the bond market and bill market at the rate of $160 billion a month for the next 3 months. And during that time, the Fed says, or will say, that it's going to withdraw $10 billion a month. So I guess that's good. We'll only be net 150 billion in new money rather than 160. That, talk about too little, too late.